So it was thus that I reverted back to Liz's hutong, which had really come in handy at this point. The temp gigs on the Yahoo job boards were looking pretty bleak. I discovered those job boards with some of that digital shoe leather research skills I'd picked up in the new online revolution. It took me a couple of days before I hooked into a single under-the-table writing job, creating sitcom scripts for English language textbooks. My middle-aged Chinese employer, Yan, wanted friends without the WGA fees. A week later, I had some walking around money and finally called Eileen. She invited me for drinks in Sanlitun, at the end of a street where the smoke drifted from a stand selling young rotrar, cooked meat on a stick rolled in red spices, manned by a Xinjiang Muslim guy. Amongst the people engaged in Beijing's nightlife, that street food was a legend, usually mixed with a bottle of Yanjing beer. Eileen sat me down at a plastic table and called to an old woman holding an industrial-strength black trash bag. Inside the bag, the woman was hauling endless stacks of pirated DVDs. Apparently, this was another staple of life in China, Eileen said. If you like to watch movies,
this is the best price you can find,
she said, after briefly haggling the price down to 6 kwai and then down to 4.5 each for 10. I sat there with the China representative of the MPAA, the most anti-movie piracy organization on earth, picking out pirated DVDs together. That was how it was in China. It just was. There was no right or wrong to wring your hands over, and Eileen had somehow mastered the art of not giving a Beijing rat's ass about it, no matter what her job was. She'd passed through the looking glass, just merely existing in the world with everyone else, as a way of coping with her job title. We were in a place where titles and job descriptions weren't really the people who carried them, no matter where the money went. But Eileen never lost that professional, civilized demeanor, somehow maintaining a distance above the weeds, safely insulated from the riffraff of the counterfeit goods economy. DVD piracy financed and laundered a lot more than we'd ever see with our eyes, things I didn't want to know about, things that pushed me away from thinking about ever settling down in China. Eileen was clearly operating from a high castle, while I was just looking for a way to make it into next week. We parted ways, and I'd run into her again once or twice with some other foreign guy who was trapped in the corporate business world like her. I had just come too far since my days in those Wall Street cubicles to look back. I watched Eileen walk away and step into a taxi. It was about an hour later before Cal and I were back at Pure Girl again, picking up essentially from where we left off. Cal was already finishing his second vodka tonic as I walked in. He had his attention focused on a shapely figure in a white tube top surrounded by 3 guys at the bar. We greeted each other, and he offered to buy the first round, stood up and approached the commotion around the tube top. A minute later, he returned with 2 drinks, commenting on the Russians in their company.
So that's Jamie Smith over there. He's a steely Brit, runs a language and corporate training school. He's kind of tight with the Russian mob. That muscular kid in the baby blue tank top is obscenely rich. I have no idea why he comes here.
Cal raised his glass to get things started.
Yeah.
We drank, and Cal suddenly glanced up again at the doorway, and then glanced back at me, straining to avoid eye contact with whoever had just walked in. I watched her as she passed the table. She glanced around the room, then at me briefly, striking deeply as a young Sophia Loren, and she continued forward to join the small group at the bar.
That's Clementine. You want to avoid her.
Cal said. Clementine, huh? So where is she from? I asked.
Turkey. She speaks fluent English and Mandarin, too.
Okay, so why do I want to avoid her?
She's dating Jamie Smith, and the moment they break up, any one of those Russians are going to be wanting to pick up the slack.
Yeah, well, it's not all up to them, is it?
Cal noticed my eyes following her across the room and didn't say anything else until I snapped out of it, turning back to our conversation, remembering that I was barely starting to get the lay of the land here. All right, so I heard Quentin Tarantino is...
Huxley's.
Cal interrupted.
He always digs that place.
I nodded, still continually sipping, removing the two thin red plastic straws and dropping them on the table. All right, so where can I... Cal held up a finger, asking me to wait, as he downed his third vodka tonic before the ice had barely melted, stacking it back onto the table.
I am going to take you there,
he said. My attention went back to Clementine as she chatted with her other friends, including the girl in the white top. The entirety of Clementine's demeanor, her body language, her energy, a familiarity with something I had not encountered since leaving New York, made her impossible to ignore. Cal had told me to stay away, that I was better off not knowing, like somehow mother tells her kid not to be afraid of the dark. I downed my last drink before following Cal out the door, somehow with the simple knowledge that I'd be seeing Clementine again, somewhere, somewhen, in the not-too-distant future. Huxley's was just a 5-minute walk around the corner into one of the alleys that connected to South Bar Street. While the sign outside said, "Shut up and drink," the interior was muted, dark, and direct, not much different from Tarantino's dialogue, a bar on one side and tables on the other. Cal finally got down to his own details. He enjoyed brushes with Beijing's art world, while professionally just treading water as a degree-holding native English speaker, a business consultant to a Wolfie, a steel industry wholly owned foreign enterprise operating in Beijing. But his social drive pulled him more often than not into the 798 district, a cluster of military factories in the northern part of the city that were now incarnating as ultra-high-end art galleries. Oliver Stone had a girlfriend who owned Yand Club, a former ammunition factory on 798 territory, now renovated as a magnet for the globally cultured jet set. By the end of the night, I was sitting in the back seat of another taxi with Olivia, black lace top over a short black layered dress, just fun complications over slender legs that ended in a pair of dark blue faux leather high heels and cork soles. The blur carried us back into Liz's hutong. Another blur pulled us forward just before the door opened, and Liz walked in, back home early from our business trip that her company had apparently postponed. Inconvenient all around. Liz dropped her leather duffel bag onto the floor with an emotional relinquishment that landed like a heavy, cold, wet stone. Olivia was already dressed as Liz, like an interrogator, pulled the chain to click on the harsh overhead tungsten bulb and calmly told me that I had until the end of the next day to get the fuck out. Thus, it was time to call Jeff's contact, Orville. I had finished packing by noon, and Liz had already left for her regular job back at the Swiss embassy. I stayed a bit longer because I needed a Wi-Fi connection to get back onto the Yahoo local job boards and find something to replace the sitcom writing gig, which had so far proven a welcome source of alternate cash flow. I clicked on a single link that appeared to have some form of promise. Another writing gig, this time for Beijing TV. I made the call and within a couple of minutes had an appointment set up for the following week. It was 6 in the evening when I entered the taxi and called the number Jeff had given me.
Way, hello?
Said the casual American, clear and deep voice. I introduced myself, a friend of Jeff, looking for work.
Yeah, okay, you know Chaoyang Gongyar Shimur. How long have you been here? Can you tell the... No, just hand the phone to the driver.
He said. The driver took the phone, not recognizing my attempt to relay the destination in Mandarin. After a few words, the driver nodded, offering the reassuring "okay" in heavily accented English, and handed the phone back. As the car lurched forward, I watched the future start to organically work itself out again. Goose and Duck, Chaoyang Park, Beijing. Except for the bassist, who was from Madagascar, the rest of the band was Filipino. The second indication, since Bacchus Bar in Shenyang, that Filipino cover bands in China were indeed a thing. This particular Filipino cover band was currently pulling off a pretty decent rendition of Springsteen, a thoroughly American cover despite the bar being Canadian-Chinese owned. The Goose and Duck Bar occupied the top of the hill near the west gate of Chaoyang Park, before the road made a radical curve left, departing from the row of bars that had become a solid alternative to the increasingly overrun streets of Sanlitun. The seating outside with metal patio furniture offered a little more peace and quiet for the conversation, away from the music, pool table, and conversations reverberating across the shiny wood surfaces inside. I paid and got out of the taxi and walked curiously over to a table where a balding 50-something thin man with thick glasses, the only foreigner whose appearance seemed to fit the voice I just heard on the phone. Sitting next to him was a burly Chinese man in his 40s, with the countenance of what could be best described as a friendly bear. "You must be Orville Pierce, right?" I said, meeting two gazes with hidden expectations and handshakes.
Yeah, good to meet you. This is Ron. Grab a chair. Want anything to drink?
"Vodka tonic," I said, pulling up a metal mesh chair, noisily grating on the cement patio. I sat down and Orville leaned away from the table and called out,
Fuyar?
That meant waiter, delivered in a heavy Beijing accent. The joke was that regular cows go moo, while Beijing cows go mer. A disheveled, teenage-looking waiter standing at the open entrance door to the bar promptly trotted over.
Vodka tonic. And Ron, you want anything?
Ron shook his head, taking another sip from a still half-full pint of Yanjing.
Shit,
said Orville, leaning back into the table.
So,
he continued,
I talked a little bit with Jeff. What brings you to Beijing?
Well, I took a job as a salesman for a corporate training, and probably the worst possible mistake because I'm not a salesman by any sight, I said. But Jeff said to give you a call, so, I mean, he was one of the cooler heads I've met here, American foreigner heads. I mean, you know, the spy plane thing, 9/11, none of that seemed to even faze him. Orville beamed as Ron chuckled.
How did you make it? Where were you? Also in Shenyang, right?
Well, I think there's something to be said for being out of sight, out of mind, right? Look, I'm not the most political person in the world.
You're political just by fucking being here.
Yeah, but I don't make it my 9 to 5, I said, collecting thoughts for a moment, feeling the unexpected segue into interrogation. I'm an artist, that's pretty much it.
What, like a painter?
I'm not good enough to paint, really, so it's photography. Orville glanced at Ron.
We should introduce him to Tom.
Ron chimed in.
Tom Turner, he's also a photographer. You guys should meet. I think he should be a professional, but he has long hair. He looks like Jesus.
So you're looking for a job now, though. I mean, is that it?
Well, yeah, that's about the long and short of it. The vodka tonic arrived just in time for Orville to make a toast.
To new gigs, then.
To new gigs, I said, and we clinked glasses.
I almost finished mine before leaning back into the chair, looking at Orville to tell him thanks for the hospitality. Ron leaned forward, as if to pick up the conversation he and Orville were having before I arrived.
So you're American or Canadian?
American. I'm from New York, I said. Ron nodded calmly, reminding me of that calm, gangsterous reaction I'd gotten from Joe Vitarelli when I overshot the price for my screenplay by $1 million. Ron glanced briefly at Orville before taking another sip from his beer. Orville picked up from the glance and carried the ball.
So, Ron is what you might call an entrepreneur. He has some ideas, so I'll let you guys continue. My wife probably has a dough roller picked out to whack me over the head at this point. Jesus Christ.
Ron smiled and took another sip from his beer, watching Orville shuffle over to the waiter and hand him a wad of cash.
Orville used to be an Episcopalian priest,
said Ron, as his phone chimed with an incoming text message. Ron looked at his phone briefly before dropping it back onto the table. Never would have guessed, I said, sipping again.
So where are you staying?
I'm in a hutong in the Forbidden City. Hu Jintao is my neighbor. I'm house sitting for a couple of weeks, but she doesn't want me bringing home any other women, though, which is...
Sucks.
Interrupted Ron.
You're not even fucking her, are you?
Yeah, well, she came back early and found me with a girl, so, she wasn't too happy. So I need to be out of there.
Oh no, that's terrible,
said Ron, smiling as he sipped his beer again.
Look,
he continued.
Why don't you stay at my place? There is an extra bedroom. You can stay there until you get back on your feet. We can also talk more, and I can introduce you to more of Beijing.
I nodded. I gotta say, that would really help me out at this stage. Jeff had really come through.
Fair enough,
he said, downing some more of his drink.
I think we can figure out some ways to make a shitload of money,
he said finally, his eyes widening briefly for emphasis. I didn't notice the middle-aged Chinese man in a black suit and turtleneck, with a heavily pockmarked face, sitting like Aragorn in the shadows at a table on the other side of the patio. I also didn't notice Orville saying goodbye to him, and I wouldn't know they even knew each other until a few months down the road. As a matter of regular pastime, another DVD seller, this time a well-tanned and weathered younger woman in her 30s, approached my table with a shoebox full of loot. I picked out The Recruit and The Bourne Identity, while Ron kept his eyes on me, thoughts racing as he downed the rest of his beer. Ron introduced me to his Chinese-Canadian wife, Stella, a straight-haired, fashion-conscious woman in her late 30s who had processed visas at the Canadian embassy. She seemed less interested in us than some other appointments she had to rush off to for her jewelry business, based out of some other apartment where she seemed to spend most of her time. Ron's ayi, or housekeeper, was a wizened 60-something who'd seen her share of strife in this life. Anyone who lived through the Cultural Revolution had the makings of being a true survivor. She'd prepared a quick dinner for me when I moved in. I hauled my Vio and everything else into the small guest room down the hall from Ron's bedroom. Stella returned about an hour later with some groceries, and the three of us sat down at the dining room table, where I managed to convince her to let me photograph a model wearing her jewelry the next week. The foreigner fascination with DVDs was no doubt a result of being in such an unfamiliar environment for so long. The problem was that it often clouded reality, even to the point of becoming a slightly warped version of it. Ron had set me up pretty nicely. He'd arranged for my official photo ID so I could come and go through security to the apartment as needed, situated in a relatively cushy residence complex called Chaoyang Garden. One evening, Ron and I sat down to watch the U.S. invasion of Iraq. He started to explain some of his plan, that there were people in China with a lot of money who wanted a fresh start somewhere overseas. We were going to help separate them from their money, he said, by getting them visas to go to America and Europe. What they did once they got there through customs was their business. There were different ways to do this. One was by getting an official business invitation, and that first required research. Ron searched for companies in countries with low barriers to entry, companies that were looking to host potential Chinese business partners, even if it was just for a temporary official visit. Norway became an attractive target. Another one was Mexico. From there, people could either disappear or move around freely, like walking into the United States. There were several ways that Ron was trying to smuggle his clients. One was a partnership with Beijing Youth Travel Service, which made regular arrangements for trips to prime U.S. destinations like New York and Los Angeles. To get visas, Ron had set up fake businesses on paper, none of them based in Beijing, to lower suspicions of the notoriously ruthless Mormons manning the visa application windows. Ron had made a trip to Shenyang, where it was easier than Beijing to get visas. He'd paid lots of money taken from his clients for the fake passports, which said his clients were from Shenyang, a relatively low-profile point of origin. He wanted me to be the official U.S. representative who would present the paperwork to the consulate. For another group of clients he was sending to Norway, he had arranged fake paperwork setting them up as executives for a real lathe machinery business in Tianjin, which had sold them the positions again for lots of money. The paperwork would match their visas, with company name and position, once the official invitation arrived from the Norwegian company. The trip to Tianjin involved another train ride back, this time in first class, in a cabin that I shared with another younger, attractive girl who said I could just call her Jennifer. Her hair was long, black, and straight, with no lack of style around her forehead. It fell naturally and was cut well, framing large eyes and strikingly exotic bone structure characteristic of someone more from Harbin, further north than even Shenyang. Her English was good, and as the excuse would go, she wanted to practice while helping me with whatever Mandarin I needed to brush up on, and this landed us in a new relationship rather quickly. On my second date with Jennifer, we went to a bar called Black Sun, the name of a song I'd been introduced to by the supermodel X back in New York, a Dead Can Dance sample of what was a distinct sound of 4AD, their record label. Deep male vocals that resonated with a deep timbre drum and orchestral sophistication, as if in a chant, speaking mysteries, starting with murder, and of a black sun in a white world, a sun named Eden, and the eyes of the living dead. But the bar was rather innocuous, without any hint of the song, and one could feel comfortable enough to play pool or play darts while intoxicated. I'd been to the bar on previous occasions in the weeks prior, once to close a bid for a job shooting for Edelman for a nationwide Olay campaign, one of a few freelance scores that got my career engine sputtering. Tonight, however, was the last time I would visit. For some reason, the owner's wife was on a warpath. In a quiet moment with Jennifer in the back patio, the power was cut. I was none too pleased and took it up with the owner's wife, who was running the place that night. The way she felt she could throw around her weight without regard for her customers spurred me on to utter the word bitch. And to Jennifer's horror and a few other patrons, she started throwing punches. I defended myself, and her husband, who had just returned from buying some food for the bar, took over the attack and pushed me over a booth, landing me briefly on my back. He angrily muttered something about his good wife. I'd had enough. I grabbed Jennifer, threw a 20 kwai bill at the bar to cover our drinks, and stormed out. Jennifer tried unsuccessfully to calm my nerves, and upon noticing the Goose and Duck just a few doors up the street, decided to take her there with me to cool down. The Filipino band was not there tonight, but the classic rock CDs they had put on were good enough. Once through the door, I noticed Orville paying for one of his usual draft beers at the bar. Thinking it rude to let my anger get the better of me, I walked over and said hello, but he could tell something was wrong. After introducing him to Jennifer and taking him through the quick and dirty of the recent incident, he turned to take a look beyond the bar. There was Orville's mysterious acquaintance, the guy I had noticed the night Orville and I met, sitting at a table alone. Orville was just going back to join him, he said, and added, maybe this guy could help me with the current situation. I took Jennifer, and Orville introduced us to his friend, Michael, ex-cop. Michael had a cigarette Mao style in one hand and reached out with his other, his thoroughly scary pockmarked face giving way to a friendly countenance for now. He was patient, professional, and kind, and he encouraged me to let him know what had just happened. After I had relayed everything, Jennifer and I were speechless as he said, getting up, "I will take care of it." He calmly put down his beer, put on his waist-high fur coat, took his cigarette, and walked out the door. Jennifer reassured me to just let things play out, as this is how things were done in China. Michael returned with Black Sun's boss's wife and led her over to our table. I stood up again, clueless, as Michael told her to apologize. Like a puppet, she bowed 3 times, each time saying in English, "I am sorry," her face marked with sheer terror. Michael looked at me for approval. I nodded and gestured as best I could, and the Black Sun lady left the bar. I sat back down with Jennifer, and Michael and I got to know each other so well that he proposed a double date with me, Jennifer, and his wife, Cece. We were both born the same year, and he was also from Shenyang, so that made us brothers of a sort that never really faded very far. Every year after that, I paid Michael to hook up a 1-year multiple-entry working visa. In the light of the morning sun, blazing through the tall lobby windows of the public security building, he'd walk to the front of the line in his fur coat, cutting past some 30 foreigners working for companies like Shell Oil and CBS News, and call over someone who would hand me back my passport, visa stamped, in 5 minutes. We'd walk back outside and bro hug, and he'd light up another cigarette and jump back into his black Audi, which he maintained was not one of the counterfeit ones he'd once pointed out on the road, and drive off. An ex-cop in Beijing was someone you never wanted to lose as a friend. He even took me once to try some gourmet dog meat, which I later came to know as a bounding ritual among Chinese cops. Either way, it wasn't just cavorting with an ex-cop that prodded my conscience in how to handle Ron and his visa fraud business. It took about 3 days for Ron to lay it all out on the table. I went along as far as I could, tagging along to meetings, pretending to be their guy who would present the paperwork. I pretended to be clueless that he was setting me up to be the front guy and the fall guy. Maybe he had gotten some clues from his wife, who worked a stretch at the Canadian embassy. But when I heard that there was a guy at the Cuban embassy who was also involved to send the Mexico-bound clients to Cuba first, I decided I was cutting it a little close to let this international criminal gang make any progress forward. It was about 5 in the afternoon when I went into his computer he'd given me access to for the work and copied all the names of his clients, their passport numbers, company names, and anything else I could find onto a thumb drive. Maybe it was the freshness of just having watched my pirated copy of The Bourne Identity that gave me the gumption to pull it off, but the drive was now secreted away, and then I laid down on my bed in the guest room and closed the door quietly. A few minutes later, Ron walked through the door with a hooker he'd picked up from the Lido, a tall one with some of those Harbin features. He took her in his bedroom, and after paying her to leave, felt compelled to explain that it was really cheaper than marriage. The next morning, on my way via metro to meet the producers at BTV for the English script writing gig, I called Cal and asked to meet. He suggested steak and eggs, by far one of the best brunches I'd had in China for the 7 years I was there. By the time we'd met up, I'd landed the BTV job. At least I wasn't coming to him like a degenerate with no cash flow. I needed a place to crash, though, because I was going to go to the U.S. Embassy in about 4 minutes and turn over the details of Ron's entire visa fraud operation. I pulled out the Shenyang consulate security guy's card, the one with the mustache. It was time to throw down and get the hell out. Cal sat back in his chair, taking it all in.
Well, shit, I mean, I guess, yeah, you need to get the fuck out of there. I don't have an extra bedroom, but I have a couch.
Yeah, fuck it, good enough, I said. I owe you one, pal. Cal picked up his mimosa, motioned to cheers. His eyes tightened on me, but we'd gotten closer as friends by now. I'd spent about a week at Cal's apartment before I had heard what happened. The U.S. Embassy Visa Fraud Unit had turned over everything to the Beijing police, who ended up arresting everyone on the spot, including Ron. A month after that, another one of Orville's friends named Simon, a young local guy from the much poorer Gansu province, had kindly offered me a guest room of his own at an apartment he shared with his young wife in Shufuying, near the Fourth Ring Road, a stretch farther away from the center of town. Since all the bad apples had already been taken down, and due to my friendship with the ex-cop, in effect, black society, according to Michael's wife, Cece, bragging about how much Michael could help me, there was no one left who could possibly hold any grudge. Orville was a rare kind of angel investor of sorts, usually encountered while drunk, who was best intentioned toward every younger expat he encountered. At the Lido Hotel, site of another regular concentration of expats a little further north, Orville was just finishing a conversation at a patio bar with an escort named Gerlay, long black hair strenuously pulled back over a light yellow spandex top. He'd called me to introduce me to another photographer who was cutting more into the photojournalism path, Tom Turner. I sat down as Tom and I had missed each other at the Goose and Duck at least once before, as I'd heard at least one date ask me if I knew him. I sat down at Orville's table, joining Tom, who indeed had the telltale Jesus hair fondly recalled by Ron. Tom and I became fast friends. We spoke the same language of the visual art, and we both had promising futures in our careers. Tom had just scored his first major cover for the South China Morning Post, and Orville wanted me there to celebrate. Meanwhile, the usual roaming DVD seller approached. This time, I picked out the new Bond film, Die Another Day, which had just been released in November. In a timeline that continued on par, the last film had him working with Chinese intelligence, and now the very first shot in the new film was titled Pukchak Coast, North Korea. In my own continuing search for legitimate work, after the Beijing TV writing stint deteriorated with a creative disagreement between the producers, I was riding a clean elevator up to a party advertised in the local English rag, That's Beijing, that was supposed to be foreigner-friendly, looking for some contacts who could possibly lead to a 9-to-5. I was slightly surprised to encounter one of the Beijing TV producers, an animated portly Indian with an American Eastern Seaboard accent. He spent adequate time explaining, gesticulating, that he was powerless to keep me on as a writer. I was pouring myself an orange vodka when I noticed Stella, Ron's wife, standing next to me. She'd just been to Ron's funeral, but there is no body to bury, she said, before telling me with that jaded, emotionless delivery of hers.
You'd make a really good spy.